Mike Harrison was just another New York taxi driver, cruising the city's busy streets every day. But, on an ordinary night, while cleaning the back seat of his taxi, he found something that would change his life forever: a state-of-the-art cell phone, forgotten by a mysterious passenger. Moved by his honesty, he decided to return it, but soon found himself at the center of a plot that mixed technology, power, and real dangers. At the end of this journey, Mike would face a dilemma that would not only put his life at risk, but also decide the fate of thousands of people. Hello everyone, and welcome to Timeless Tales USA. I'm thrilled to bring you another captivating story today that I know you'll enjoy. Mike, an experienced and honest taxi driver, finished a ride in the heart of Manhattan on a cold night. While organizing the taxi, he found a cell phone in the back seat. He remembered another time months earlier when he returned a lost wallet but never received a thank you. Still, he decided to act with integrity again. When he called the last number registered, he was answered by a woman in an urgent tone. "This cell phone belongs to Mr. Kingston. Please store it carefully." Without thinking twice, Mike agreed. The name David Kingston didn't mean much to him at the time, but after a quick search, he discovered he was the CEO of a technology giant. As he was driving to return his cell phone, he noticed a black car that appeared to be following him. The next day, Mike went to the Kingston Enterprises building to return the cell phone. Upon entering the luxurious office, he was greeted by David Kingston, an elegant-looking man with a controlled smile. "You can't imagine the importance of what you're giving back, Mike," David said, holding the cell phone tightly. Mike tried to downplay the gesture. "For me, it was just a forgotten cell phone." David laughs. "For me, it's much more than that." When Mike was about to leave, an envelope was handed to him with an invitation. "Kingston Residence, 8 p.m. Your presence is essential." On the way home, Mike notices the same black car following him again. At the Kingston mansion, Mike felt out of place. Among influential businessmen and politicians, he was introduced to Sarah Kingston, David's daughter. Sarah smiled, but her voice was serious. "My father doesn't invite anyone for no reason. You must be special." During the party, Mike noticed a man in a black suit who seemed to be watching him the entire time. The feeling of danger grew. Later, David took Mike to a private room and revealed, "This cell phone contains confidential information that could change the world. If it falls into the wrong hands, the consequences will be disastrous." Suddenly, the mansion's power was cut off, and hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. The mansion is invaded, and Mike is forced to protect his cell phone. David handed Mike his cell phone. "Keep this with you. They will never suspect a taxi driver." Mike hesitated, but complied. He ran to the taxi as gunshots and screams echoed through the mansion. "This is not what I expected when returning a cell phone," he muttered while driving. As they fled, David explained, "This cell phone contains information about a new system that can predict cyber attacks and global threats. A black car blocks the road, triggering a dangerous chase. Mike uses his taxi driving skills to escape a chase. The black car crossed the road, forcing Mike to swerve sharply. He used shortcuts and narrow streets, maneuvering as only an experienced taxi driver would." David looked at him in awe. "You have a special talent, Mike." After losing his pursuers, Mike parked on a deserted street. "Now, you're going to tell me everything, or I'll throw this away." David sighed and revealed more about the revolutionary security system and the conspiracy he faced. In the silence of the deserted street, Mike stared at David, his patience at its limit. "It's now or never, David. What exactly is happening?" David took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "This cell phone contains the prototype of a system called Nexus 1. It is capable of tracking digital activities in real time and preventing attacks before they happen. It is revolutionary, but also dangerous." Mike rolled his eyes. "And you thought it would be a good idea to put this in the back seat of my taxi?" David looked away. "I didn't expect the cell phone to be compromised. What you need to understand, Mike, is that you are now involved. If this system falls into the wrong hands, the consequences will be catastrophic. Before they could continue, the sound of screeching tires echoed down the street. The black car reappeared, this time accompanied by another vehicle. Armed men began to get out of the cars. "Run, Mike!" shouted David. Mike and David flee through an abandoned warehouse but end up surrounded, forcing Mike to use his cunning to escape. Mike drove at full speed to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. He and David jumped out of the taxi and ran inside, trying to hide among the narrow hallways and stacked boxes. "Any bright ideas?" Mike asked, panting. David pointed to a staircase. "If we can get to the top floor, we can access the roof." As they climbed, the armed men began to search the place. Mike, thinking quickly, found a transport cart and pushed a stack of boxes towards the pursuers, creating a temporary barrier. When they finally reached the roof, David made a quick call to Sarah. "We are trapped. We need reinforcements now." While they wait for help, David reveals that someone on his own team is sabotaging the project, further complicating the situation. Mike and David found Sarah in a safe location. She was visibly tense but relieved to see them. "You don't have much time. The people behind you know where we are." David frowned. "How do they keep tracking us?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Because someone on our team is helping them. Tom, your partner, is providing information about Nexus 1. He wants to sell the system to the black market." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "So while I'm running around saving your invention, you're being betrayed by one of your own men?" Sarah showed Mike a device she had installed on her cell phone. "This locks the location temporarily, but we can't use it for long. We need to act quickly." Mike decides it's time to confront Tom directly, but the situation quickly spirals out of control. David managed to arrange a meeting with Tom, pretending he wanted to negotiate. Mike insisted on going along, even though he knew the risk. The meeting took place in an empty warehouse. The tension was palpable. "So, Tom," David began, "it's time to put your cards on the table." Tom smiled coldly. "You are idealists. They think they can change the world with technology. But people like me understand the true value of the Nexus 1. Before they could respond, armed men appeared around them. "I think that ends our conversation," said Tom, as he calmly left. Mike, improvising once again, found a fire extinguisher and used it to create a distraction, covering the area in smoke and allowing him and David to escape. David reveals that Nexus 1 has a hidden mechanism that can be activated remotely, but needs Mike's help to use it correctly. While hiding in an underground parking lot, David finally revealed the truth. Nexus 1 is not just a security system. It can also disable any device connected to the network. Mike stared at him in disbelief. "So, it's basically a weapon?" David nodded. "That's why we need to protect him. But to activate the protection mechanism, we need access to a data center, and that requires someone with practical skills like yours." Mike sighed. "So, do you really need a taxi driver to save the world?" Sarah smiled. "Don't underestimate what you can do, Mike." As they head to the data center, they are ambushed, and Nexus 1 begins emitting a dangerous signal. Mike drove the back roads of New York, the Nexus 1 hidden in his backpack in the trunk. Sarah and David monitored possible signs of tracking. The silence in the taxi was filled with tension. "Are you sure this will work?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. David replied without hesitation. "It's our only chance." Suddenly, a truck crossed the road, blocking the way. Before they could react, two black SUVs surrounded them. Armed men emerged from the vehicles, shouting orders. "Get out of the car! Now!" one of them shouted. Thinking quickly, Mike activated the taxi's smoke system, flooding the cabin and his pursuers with a dense fog. He sped off, swerving through the fields beside the road. "You're crazy!" Sarah exclaimed, holding on to the seat. "I'm a taxi driver." Mike replied with a nervous smile. They escaped, but Nexus 1 began emitting a high-pitched sound, indicating that it had been activated remotely. Nexus 1 emits a signal that exposes its location, forcing the group to improvise again as time runs out. As they stopped at an abandoned warehouse to regroup, Sarah checked Nexus 1. "This shouldn't be happening," she said, worried. David took the device, quickly analyzing it. "It's transmitting. Someone managed to access the system remotely." Mike frowned. "So they know exactly where we are?" Before they could respond, the sound of helicopters echoed in the distance. Sarah began working frantically to deactivate the signal, while Mike looked around, looking for an escape route. "I'm going to get them out of here," Mike said with determination. David tried to stop it. "It's suicide." "Maybe, but if I don't do it, you two won't have time to finish the job." Mike got into the taxi and accelerated, luring the pursuers away from the warehouse. Mike is captured by enemies, but leaves clues for Sarah and David to rescue the Nexus. After an intense chase, Mike was cornered on a narrow bridge. He exited the taxi with his hands raised, but as he was taken away, he discreetly left Sarah's GPS device on the ground. The men took him to an abandoned warehouse, where he was confronted by Tom, the traitor. "Do you really think you can save the world with your honesty?" asked Tom, with a sarcastic smile. Mike remained calm, even though he knew he was in a dangerous situation. "Don't underestimate the power of doing the right thing, Tom." Sarah and David locate Mike, but must face an army of armed men to rescue him and Nexus 1. With the help of GPS, Sarah and David located the warehouse where Mike was being held. Sarah used her technology expertise to hack the security system, while David distracted the guards. Mike, taking advantage of the chaos, managed to free himself and get the Nexus 1, hidden in a briefcase. "You took your time," he joked as he ran to join Sarah and David. As they fled, Tom appeared, holding a gun. "This won't end well for you." David faced Tom. "You can try to stop us, but you will never have Nexus 1. The group needs to activate Nexus 1's protection mechanism before it's too late." Back at the hideout, Sarah revealed Nexus 1's biggest secret. The system has a flaw designed to prevent it from being used for evil. But if activated incorrectly, it will self-destruct and destroy everything around it. Mike stared at Sarah in disbelief. "And you think I'm the right guy to handle this?" David intervened. "Mike, your ability to improvise is what got us here. We trust you." Mike leads the group in a race against time to save Nexus 1 and prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. In hiding, Nexus 1 began emitting a high-pitched, intermittent sound, signaling that the system was approaching a critical point. Sarah looked at David with concern. "We have less than 2 hours to deactivate the system or it will self-destruct." Mike got into the taxi, pulling Sarah and David inside. "You have the plan. I have the keys. Let's finish this." With Sarah driving and David adjusting the Nexus 1 along the way, Mike sped through the streets of New York. Helicopters hovered overhead, and SUVs began to pursue them, forcing Mike to use all his experience to outwit the enemies. "You make it look easy," Sarah exclaimed as Mike made a sharp turn to escape a roadblock. "That's just another day for a taxi driver in New York," he replied, sweating. Finally, they arrived at an abandoned facility where the system needed to be connected to a secure terminal. Inside the facility, the group finds Tom and his men, ready for the final confrontation. Upon entering the facility, Mike, Sarah and David were surrounded by Tom and his men. Tom held a gun and smiled coldly. "It's over, David. Hand over Nexus 1, and maybe I'll let you get out alive." Mike stepped forward, holding a tool he had gotten from the cab. "If you want the Nexus, you'll have to go through me." "Tom, are you a taxi driver? Don't make me laugh." But before Tom could react, Mike threw the tool at the light console, temporarily turning off the room. Using the confusion, Sarah and David rushed to connect Nexus 1 to the terminal. In the chaos, Mike faced off against Tom's men, using his wits and improvisation to buy time. One of the men tried to reach him, but Mike pulled out a gas cylinder and released it, creating a controlled explosion that threw him backwards. Sarah shouted, "We need 1 more minute." Tom personally confronts Mike while Sarah struggles to deactivate the system at the last second. With the Nexus 1 connected to the terminal, the system began to disable its critical functions. But Tom didn't give up. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at Mike. "You won't get out of here alive." Mike, without hesitation, faced Tom with courage. "Honesty and courage have brought me here. You can't understand this." As Tom advanced, Mike used his strength to disarm him. In one swift movement, he knocked him down, leaving him unconscious. Sarah finally deactivated Nexus 1. "I achieved. It's safe now." But the facility's alarm began to ring, indicating that the facility was about to self-destruct. The group must escape the facility as time runs out. With Nexus 1 secure, the group rushed to exit the facility. Explosions began to echo as walls collapsed around them. Mike led the way, guiding Sarah and David to the exit. At the last moment, they managed to escape, stepping out into the daylight as the building collapsed behind them. Mike fell to the ground, exhausted but relieved. "Why does it always feel like I'm running away from something?" David looked at him with a smile. "Because you're the right guy for this, Mike." With Nexus 1 safe, David makes Mike an offer that could change his life forever. Back in safety, David offered Mike a position at his company, praising his courage and intelligence. "You would be an asset to us, Mike." But Mike shook his head. "I'm just a taxi driver, David. And that's how I help people." Sarah smiled. "You've helped more people than you know, Mike." A few days later, Mike was back behind the wheel of his taxi. As he drove, he reflected on recent events. Life had returned to normal, but he knew his honesty and courage had made a difference. When a new passenger got into the taxi, he asked, "Where to, sir?" And with a smile on his face, Mike headed off to his next race, ready to face whatever fate brought. Enjoyed the story? Hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Tales USA for more amazing content. Share one word in the comments to describe how this story made you feel.